He had a very busy social schedule that made rest time scarce. And then the doctors, they tried different cures. Such as applying opium, castor oil, leeches, and Virginia snakeweed. Oh, you got a sickness, huh? You got a flu? Well, here's some opium. Here's some leeches and some opium. And
I started to get scared, and he was, basically like ripping my clothes off, and I was actually really, I got freaked out. I just turned into this animal. It was like a completely different person.
so treason, supporting Confederates, supporting Nazis, it's treasonous bribery. So getting paid in the hotels by foreign nationals, high crimes, and or misdemeanors. Find a criminal, impeach, convict. This is about John Tyler's presidency, his impeachment, and his Confederacy. So John Tyler, of course, is the 10th President of the United States of America, as every American knows. You got Washington, Adams, Jefferson, Madison, Monroe, John Quincy Adams, Andrew Jackson, Martin Van Buren, William Henry Harrison, and then John Tyler, James K. Polk, Zachary Taylor, Millard Fillmore, Pierce, Buchanan. Okay, so John Tyler is the 10th one, right? After William Henry Harrison. When William Henry Harrison was going to be mocked for giving a long inaugural address, and then he dies apparently because he was standing out in the rain without a jacket, and it was cold and rainy, and he catches pneumonia. Well, he does die of an illness. It's not because of the inauguration. That is a myth. To impeach a war president, though, this is only extended because I don't know how to speak, but this is how to impeach a war criminal in 3 easy steps. First, you got to find a president, right? Impeachment, this is an American process, so you got to find a president who is worthy of impeachment. And what would it take to be worthy of impeachment? Could he shoot an innocent, just like a homeless person, and then, I think that's impeachable, right? Just outright, just murder, just a gun in the hand, shoot some innocent homeless person? So you find a president looking to be impeached. They need to commit treason, bribery, high crimes, and misdemeanors. Once you found that worthy person, first or second, the House says impeach, then third, the Senate says convict. So find the criminal, impeach, convict. Tyler was born March 29th, 1790, and he dies January 18th, 1862. So born 1790, which is what? 3 years after the Constitutional Convention was created, and then 1862 he's going to die in the middle of the Civil War. He's the 10th President of the United States. He served from 1841 to 1845, so 20 years before the Civil War, after briefly being the 10th Vice President. So he was Vice President, then he became President, right? He was under William Henry Harrison. His accidency, that's what he was known as, his accidency. It wasn't known exactly what happens when the president dies. Does the vice president just assume all the powers of the presidency? And John Tyler was like, yep, and that's exactly what he did. So he was a supporter of states' rights. He's a big slave owner, and his unexpected rise to the expected rise to the presidency, His Excellency John Tyler, and then the threat of the presidential ambitions of Henry fucking Clay, another slave owner. Other politicians, they were Whigs. Henry Clay's a Whig. John Tyler is a Whig. but because John Tyler was just going to stick to his own principles, regardless of what anybody told him, he basically left him estranged from both major political parties. He was a man without a party. So John Tyler, he's born in 1790. He's 63 years old when his son Lyon was born, and it's not the youngest. In fact, he had 2 more children after Lyon Tyler. You had Robert Tyler, born in 1856, and then you had Pearl Tyler, who was born in 1860. And then she's going to pass away in 1947. So Pearl was born 3 years before John Tyler dies. Tyler was still having babies when he was 70 years old. John Tyler was still popping out kids. He had a shit ton of kids. John Tyler had 8 children with his first wife, Letitia, and then 7 kids with his second wife, Julia. So that's 15 kids, 15 fucking kids. And then he had a slave plantation. So he owned 40 people, had 15 slaves, the children that he could use as slaves. A little bit about Letitia Christian. She's the first lady, the first lady to die in the White House. She died when she was 51 years of age during the presidency. So the very first, first lady to do it, she dies at 51 years of age in the evening, September 10th, 1842, from a stroke. So they say, probably poisoned by the evil John Tyler. He's a slave owner, probably raping the slaves, probably bearing kids and then selling them off into, the market. Letitia Christian died. She was taken to Virginia for burial at the plantation of her birth. So Letitia Christian was into these slave owners, just couldn't get enough of rich, powerful men, right? Rich, powerful. Who gives a shit if they're slave owners? Who gives a shit if they're immoral, right? She got hers. And then John Tyler, Caroline Harrison, and Ellen Wilson, 1914, Caroline Harrison, 1892, are the only 3 first ladies to have died in the White House. So Letitia Christian is known a distinctive, distinction for that. She also had, 8 children, so there's that. So the slave-owning Tyler's name gets to carry on. Julia Gardner is the second wife. He's going to marry her during the presidency. She's going to die 69 years of age in 1889, so she has a pretty long life. After her husband's death in 1862, she lost her 60 slaves and her 11 lost her 60 slaves after her husband's death, but, there's a civil war that's going on, and she had 60 slaves. I heard that he had 40, so if she has 60, then that means they have 60, right? So that means John Tyler had more slaves than what I had previously thought. They had a 1,000-acre farm, right, that the Sherwood Forest, or I don't know, they lost over 1,000 acres. Why does she need 1,000 acres? Oh, yeah, because she's a slave-owning piece of shit. So Julia Gardner, a slave-owning piece of shit, moved north to Staten Island with several of her children. This is during the Civil War. Family relations were so strained that her brother, David Gardner, refused to travel to Virginia to escort her to New York. Eventually moved out of her mother's home, where Julia had settled. Her home there had almost burned down by enraged Union veterans. When it was discovered that she was flying a Confederate flag on the property, she resided at the Gardner-Tyler house from 1860. Is John Tyler going to be a piece of shit president? He got something, signed a treaty or something, which I'm going to mention here in a second. But John Tyler, he is going to serve in the Confederacy. He's going to be the only president to have actually served as a member of the Confederacy. He's going to die in the middle of the war, too. So what a fucking legacy. What a fucking life, right? Become president of the United States. And it makes me think about the, Young Fuhrer that's in there now. I could see him 20 years later being on the side of the Confederates and the Nazis. Yeah, of course he'd fight against the Americans. He's already, said that those Nazis and Confederates they're good people. Some of them are good people. No, none of them are good fucking people. Look at their Nazism, fucking Confederacy. That's the shit. That's what, okay. So John Tyler was the president 20 years before the Civil War. He was a governor of Virginia in the 1820s. He was both a U.S. House representative and a senator. Stephen Hawking had repeated this over and over again. This is a briefer history of time, which I believe should be a textbook. This should be the main textbook, the first textbook. A briefer history of time. Just think about that. Briefer history of time. So his dream, he had a dream to send a spaceship to Alpha Centauri C, which is the nearest star to us other than the sun, and it's called Proxima Centauri. It's a cluster of 3 stars, and Alpha Centauri C is the one that's closest to us. And so Stephen Hawking wanted to, he says right now with the technology it would take 10,000 years to send a spaceship. There's an idea about having a sail, like a little lightweight sailboat, and then pushing it by laser. So there's some interesting ideas on the books, but 10,000 years. He went to send a ship to Proxima. He's going to serve out his term, and he's not going to run for re-election in 1844. So he did his one term as accidency, right? William Henry Harris's term. And then that's it. He only served the one term, and he never did it again. Now, just a side and a side. When it comes to the American dollar, you got George Washington's face right there. He's got 318 slaves, so no telling how many male heirs and females that he, that birthed and then he just sold into the marketplace. So Daniel Shays and John Lawrence are a million more times more worthy of having their faces being on the dollar bill than George Washington. Daniel Shays, of course, is the American soldier, the American revolutionary who had fought in order to make sure he could get to keep his fucking land, which the banks were taking from him, since he had a piece of fucking lead in his leg, which prevented him from working, since he, fought the American fucking Revolution. That's Daniel Shays. Of course he should. Lawrence was the son of the biggest slave owner in North America. So Henry Lawrence was a huge slave owner, and his son John Lawrence was opposed to slavery. John Lawrence, Daniel Shays, these are people during George Washington's era who are more worthy of being on the dollar bill than George. So Daniel Shays, right, the American revolutionary that says, hey, even the poor people should enjoy the revolution. And then George Washington and all the elites were like, fuck you, Daniel Shays. And then John Lawrence, he said, hey, why don't we arm the slaves, right? George Washington, you got all the slaves and we're fighting the revolution. Why don't you put guns in their hands? And he was like, well, that's because they're, not human and below everybody else, and then if we put guns in their hands, they might turn around and use it. So John Lawrence had suggested it. John Lawrence fights in the American Revolution. John Lawrence dies. John Lawrence is a martyr, and he was right. And he, against his time, against his own fucking dad, I'm sure he got a lot of shit about it. How come you don't know about John Lawrence? Chess is virtually infinite. There's about 400 different positions after each player moves one move apiece. And then after 2 moves have been made by each player, there's 72,000 positions to move. And then after 3 moves apiece, there's 9 million different positions. And then after 4 moves, there's 288 plus billion different possibilities. So it just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And it's limited, right? There's 64 spaces. There's 16 pieces. So there is a limited amount of combination, but it's virtually unlimited, right? 472,000, 9,288 plus billion after just 4 moves. So it's interesting to see how something so simple. I think we're losing against the machines now, but they can factor all those mathematical computations. But we got imagination, right? So what? What the hell am I trying to say? Katy Perry is a sexual predator. What she did was absolutely outrageous, and it was fucking bullshit. She stole his first kiss. So Gene Cougar could shrug his fucking shoulders like it's no big deal. No, that's an assault, right? Where you're supposed to take all of it matters. All of it matters, right? He didn't want it. He didn't ask for that. And if she would have asked, he would have said no. So therefore, just because he's young and saying, oh, yeah, people are probably saying, hey, you got to kiss Katy Perry. How dare you? She didn't do it right? She slipped and was like, oh, my God. He falls down. It's bullshit. I'm pissed off about it because remember when that 5-year-old boy kissed a 5-year-old girl in kindergarten and then got suspended? He got suspended. A 5-year-old boy, right? How dare that? Then reverse the roles. Reverse the roles. You have a 50-year-old man, right, and then goes to give a kiss and then slips right there. Is that cool? 50-year-old man kissing, a 19-year-old woman? Is that acceptable? Every heterosexual relationship, the woman is the victor. Every heterosexual relationship I've ever seen, it's like, oh, he loves her. How pitiful and pathetic, right? She's the victor. She's the one in charge. She's the one that has all the power. Even before women had the right to vote, they could get themselves a huge plantation if they're pretty enough and aim their cuteness at, John Tyler, fucking slave owners, right? Then John Tyler's two wives, they get to birth out John Tyler's babies and have to put up with his bullshit. But they get to have a rich, wealthy lifestyle, living on a big-ass house, big plantation. They got 60 slaves that boss around and tell what to do. I mean, if they have no conscience and no morality, right, that they could get themselves a bunch of land. So, John Tyler, what did he do when he was president? He signed the Webster-Ashburton Treaty, which heralded the prospect of improved relationships with Great Britain. They're going to annex Texas. So Texas was brought in by a slave-owning, low-life piece of shit president, right? So John Tyler is a slave owner, but he stood up for his, states' rights, his right to own slaves. The Whig Party, left him. The Whig Party left John Tyler. He didn't leave the Whig Party. The Whig Party left him. And then he was a president without a party. And then what's he going to do next? What, he's not going to vote for the Whigs? What's he going to do, vote for the third-party Republicans? Third parties have no chance in America. There's no chance. The American dream is dead. You can't do it. If you imagine it, you can't do it. Third parties will never have a chance in the two-party dictatorship. Yeah, right, the Republican Party. It's always going to be Whigs and Federalists. Whigs and Federalists until the day that we die. So Great Britain, the first oppressor, he's trying to, warm relations with them, which did. Tyler was said to have 40 slaves, but his second wife, had 60 slaves. So I'm going to guess he probably had 40 to 60 slaves, and who knows how many more. And there was that Greenway, I think, Virginia, Sherwood Forest. That's the name of this plantation, Sherwood Forest. As if what? He's fucking Robin Hood? No, he would be the fucking king that Robin Hood would be opposed to. So the Sherwood Forest plantation is actually still a thing today. The 10th president, he lived there for 20 years, 1842 to 1862. It's been in the continuous residence of the Tyler family since President John Tyler purchased it in 1842. It was known to be the largest frame house in the U.S. It's over 300 feet long. And the Sherwood Forest plantation reflects the lifestyle of this mid-19th century presidential family. That's from their website, but he's a Confederate. Why do you say he's a U.S. president when he changed? John Tyler, he was accused by Joshua Leavitt of fathering several black sons with his slaves and then selling them. So John Tyler, that's, an asterisk by his name on top of the big Confederacy thing, right? So because he was part of the Confederacy, he thought that that was acceptable behavior. Of course you're allowed to have sex with your slaves, and when they give children, you can sell those children to other people. That's, George Washington. That's on the face of the dollar bill. Many number of African-American families today maintain their belief in their descent from John Tyler, so they're still saying, hey, no, that's John Tyler's our daddy. George Washington did that shit too. He's got 318 slaves. And there's black families that say that they're related to George Washington. So what, right? John Tyler, he didn't free his slaves. George Washington did. He was basically, Tyler had thought that slavery was a part of states' rights, then therefore the federal government lacked the authority to establish or to abolish it. So you can't abolish slavery, according to John Tyler, but you're the fucking president. Most Americans know John Tyler as part of the Tippecanoe and Tyler 2. Just that phrase. It's an actual song, but just a phrase. Tippecanoe and Tyler 2. Tippecanoe and Tyler 2. I guess it does kind of float off the tongue. The Whig Party's colorful log cabin campaign in 1840 United States presidential election. Its lyrics sing the praises of Whig candidates William Henry Harrison, the hero Tippecanoe, and John Tyler, while denigrating incumbent Democrat Martin Van Buren. So Tip and Tie. Tip and Tie was a popular, influential campaign song. So the Republicans were opposed to slavery. Well, actually, it's not Republican. Whig candidates, right? There's no Republicans. They're third party. Republicans don't have a chance. They're third. The rhyming end of a catchy campaign slogan. I'm not sure how it goes, but here's the first stanza. Tip and Tie. So, old Tip and Tie, what's the cause of this commotion, motion? Our country through is the ball, a-rolling on for Tippecanoe and Tyler too. Tippecanoe and Tyler too. And with them will be the little van, Van used to be a man, and with them we'll beat little Van. There's no way that's how it actually goes, but those are the words. Tippecanoe, of course, is the famous canoe from New Jersey. The political canvas of 1840 with the Marseillaise was to the French Revolution. So this song sang William Henry Harrison into the presidency. And Tippecanoe and Tyler, too, is actually remembered more than the song itself. Remember the song? Quickly, I just want to talk about the Battle of Tippecanoe. It was fought November 7th, 1811. So Battle of Tippecanoe is fought in Battleground, Indiana, what is known today as Battleground, before American-led forces, Governor William Henry Harrison, governor of the Indiana Territory, and Native American warriors associated with the Shawnee leader Tecumseh. Tecumseh and his brother Tenskwatawa, also known as the Prophet, were leaders of a confederacy of Native Americans from various tribes that opposed U.S. expansion into Native territory. As tensions and violence increased, Governor Harrison marched with an army of about 1,000 men to disperse the Confederacy's headquarters at Prophetstown near the confluence of the Tippecanoe and Wabash rivers. Tecumseh was away recruiting allies when Harrison's army arrived. Tenskwatawa, a spiritual leader but not a military man, was in charge. Harrison camped near Prophetstown on November 6th and arranged to meet with Tenskwatawa the following day. The Native Americans were ultimately the Shawnee and the Confederacy, Tecumseh's Confederacy, even though he wasn't there. Tenskwatawa's, basically they lost the Battle of Tippecanoe when their ammunition ran out. So you got to save those bullets, right? When they had no bullets, when they had no guns, then the white people could kill all the Native Americans and put black people into slavery, right? Isn't that that's how it happens? The Holocaust, the way that you get the Jews to do as you tell them to go into the concentration camps, you got to have a gun, right? Make sure they have guns. And then make sure you take the guns away from the Jews, take away from the Native Americans, and take it away from the slaves. Of course white women are going to be against, Rosewood, right? So anyways, a white woman accused black men of raping them, and so they killed all the black people. Of course they don't want, black folks to have guns. They don't have a right to defend themselves. Of course they're against, okay, anyways. Tenskwatawa, the Battle of Tippecanoe, the Shawnee, Tenskwatawa are going to abandon Prophetstown. William Henry Harrison's men burned it to the ground. They destroyed the food supply stored for the winter. Like, get the fuck out of here, you Native Americans. Yeah, you were born on this land, but we're white people, and we're going to steal from you. So, once they ran out of ammunition. And the soldiers then returned to their homes, right? Once they killed a bunch of Native Americans, burned the village, destroyed all the food crops that they had stored for the wintertime, and then they just, went home and comfortably slept in their fucking beds as if they didn't just murder a whole bunch of innocent people. William Henry Harrison, uses this incident in order to capture the presidency. He accomplished his goal of destroying Prophetstown. He proclaimed he wanted decisive victory. He gained the nickname Old Tippecanoe, which was popularized in the campaign song Tippecanoe and Tyler too. Who is Tippecanoe? It's William Henry Harrison, who was president. Henry Harrison is going to win the presidential election of 1840. William Henry Harrison, Old Tippecanoe. The Battle of Tippecanoe was a defeat, a huge setback for Tecumseh's Confederacy, which may never fully recover. Tecumseh had revived an idea advocated by many Pontiac, Shawnee leader Blue Jacket, Mohawk leader Joseph Brant, which stated that Native American land was owned in common by all the tribes and land could not be sold without agreement by all the tribes. So that's what William Henry Harrison fought against. So William Henry Harrison, during the campaign, he's running against Martin Van Buren, who was coming in after Andrew Jackson. So I think he was the vice president, so he's just doing Andrew Jackson's policies. But the panic of 1837, a depression happened in 1837, and the Whigs were like, uh-oh, you suck at economy, you don't know what you're doing. So they want to run a non-contest. William Henry Harrison is going to be chosen by the Whigs over Henry Clay and Winfield Scott. So they wanted less ideological. They wanted a war hero that wasn't so polarizing as Henry Clay. Winfield Scott, I don't really know much about him. But they wanted to defeat Martin Van Buren. John Tyler of Virginia was selected as William Henry Harrison's running mate, and then they defeated Van Buren in the 1840 election. William Henry Harrison was the oldest president ever elected. Now, William Henry Harrison is going to die of pneumonia in April 1841 at the age of 68. Only 1 month after taking office, his presidency is the shortest Then John Tyler is going to assume the presidency, which sets a major precedent. So, and no, Harrison, William Henry Harrison did not die of a long inauguration. That is a myth. That's bullshit. But so what he did, okay, so you have this election. Henry Harrison goes to Washington, D.C. He's the steadfast hero of Tippecanoe. He's got a bloody shirt. He's a war hero. But he didn't want to be characterized as that backwoods character portrayed of him during their, the old the log cabin campaign. So he goes there. He wants to be dignified. He wants to show he's better educated and he's thoughtful. And he takes the oath of office on a Thursday, March 4th, 1841. It's a cold and wet day. He didn't wear a hat nor an overcoat. He rode on horseback to the ceremony instead of a closed carriage that was offered to him. And he delivered the longest inaugural address in American history. At over 8,000 words, it took him nearly 2 hours to read, although his friend and fellow Whig Daniel Webster had edited it. After becoming the first head of state to have his photograph taken, William Henry Harrison then rode through the streets. Tippecanoe, right, he's going around the inaugural parade. Old Tippecanoe goes to 3 inaugural balls, including one at Carusi's Saloon entitled the Tippecanoe Ball, which was $10 per person, which is about $237 today, and there's 1,000 guests that were there. So the inaugural address, Old Tippecanoe, detailed his statement about the Whig agenda. So the first and foremost, repudiation of Jackson and Van Buren's policies. So fuck you, Andrew Jackson, right? Fuck you, Van Buren. William Henry Harrison promised to reestablish the Bank of the United States and extend its capacity for credit by issuing paper currency, which is also known as Henry Clay's American system, and to defer to the judgment of Congress on legislative matters with sparing use of his veto power, and to reverse Jackson's spoils system of executive patronage. He promised to use patronage to create. He believes kind of in a civil service reform. William Henry Harrison didn't want to use patronage in order to enhance his own standing in government, but he wanted to actually get, hire people who were qualified. But he's only going to be in there for a month, and the only thing that he did was he called a special council. That was basically the only thing he did. So what happens is Henry Clay is going to die. So, or not Henry Clay, my God, William Henry Harrison is going to die caused by the bad weather at his inauguration. But it didn't arise until 3 weeks afterwards. So how can if it arose the inauguration didn't have anything to do with it. But he tried to rest at the White House. He couldn't find a quiet room because of Henry Clay. Henry Clay is pushing, William Henry so much that he's like, Henry Harrison writes in a letter that's dated March 10th, which is going to be just, March 26th is when he's going to become ill. So March 10th, he's saying, I'm so much harassed by the multitude that call upon me that I can give no proper attention to any business of my own. And Henry Clay is up William Henry's ass so much that he has to yell at him, I'm the president. Don't you know this, Henry? And then he bans Henry Clay and says, if you're going to talk to me, correspond to me in writing. I'm sick of your shit. March 17th, Henry Clay was also a duelist. He had a bunch of duels he fought. So did Andrew Jackson. So the only thing that William Henry Harrison had actually passed was a special session of Congress because the condition of revenue and finance of the country. So the session was scheduled to begin on May 31st. So that's the only real main thing he did. He, appointed a bunch of people that John Tyler had to reappoint afterwards. So not much. The Whig, there is a platform that said they're going to overturn the spoils system. Spoils system is patronage. You give, if you elect me, then I'll give you a job. That's the spoils system. That's patronage. And that was a big problem during the mayoral, during Pueblo, the mayors of Pueblo. They had, those issues. So March 17th, 1841 was when they proclaimed the special session. And then just 9 days after that, William Henry Harrison is going to become ill. And he's going to become ill. And he's going to say that he couldn't find a quiet spot because there was always a steady crowd of office seekers. He had a very busy social schedule that made rest time scarce. And then the doctors, they tried different cures, such as applying opium, castor oil, leeches, and Virginia snakeweed. Oh, you got a sickness, huh? You got a flu? Well, here's some opium. Here's some leeches and some opium. And Treatments only made William Henry Harrison worse, and he became delirious. William Henry Harrison's going to die 9 days after becoming ill on Sunday at 12:30 a.m. on April 4th, 1841. William Henry Harrison's doctor, Thomas Miller, diagnosed William Henry Harrison's cause of death as pneumonia of the lower lobe of the right lung. Medical analysis made in 2014 based on Dr. Miller's notes and records of the White House water supply being downstream of public sewage concluded that William Henry Harrison likely died of septic shock due to enteric fever. William Henry Harrison, old Tippecanoe, was the first president to die in office. His last words were to his doctor, but they are assumed to be directed at Vice President John Tyler. Sir, I wish you to understand the true principles of the government. I wish them carried out. I ask nothing more. Carry out the true principles. This is going to be the shortest presidency in all U.S. history, 30 days, 12 hours, and 30 minutes. So just 30 days and a half. 30 and a half days is all William Henry Harrison got to govern. And he was going to get us a Bank of the United States. He was going to extend its capacity for credit by issuing paper currency, a greenback. Can you imagine? I mean, get off the gold standard and silver standard and just issue paper currency? Yeah, right, it's going to be worth a continental. What, you think that ain't going to be worth a goddamn? It's going to be worth about as much as a continental. So he deferred to the judgment of Congress, being that they were the primary voice of the people. He didn't use his veto power very much, but the biggest thing that William Henry Harrison wanted to do was undo Andrew Jackson's spoil system of executive patronage. So he wanted to, change that. John Tyler becomes president. John Tyler becomes president, knowing that William Henry Harrison just wanted him to implement the true principles of government. So John Tyler's going to stick by, what he sees as his own principles. Now you're going to have, Henry Clay, still a slave-owning piece of shit, the war hawk that's responsible for the bloodshed of the War of 1812 that eventually burns down the White House. So slave-owning piece of shit, Henry Clay. He loves the distribution system. They have a tariff, and the tariff was going to individual senators so they could spend it however they wanted to spend it. But the Whig had some legislation. He vetoed the Whig legislation 3 times over, and then some other Whigs in Congress, led by House Ways and Means Chairman Millard Fillmore, passed in each house by 1 vote a bill that restored the tariffs to 1832 levels, and it ended the distribution of those taxes collected by the tariff is the most important thing. So he ends the distribution program. So the tariffs that come in, they were distributing, them to all the senators. When John Tyler changes the tariff levels, the tariff of 1842 is basically the same as tariff of 1832 levels. So he signs it August 30th, and it ends the distribution program. And then they even tried to put a separate bill in there to restore the distribution, but he pocket vetoed it. So it was a separate bill, part of the larger thing or some shit, but he was like, nope, we're going to do the main thing. We're not going to do this thing. So Henry Clay, right? He's like, oh my God, I'm not going to have all this money to spend on my shit. Now, the Whigs are going to be pissed off, and they're going to try to, after the tariff vetoes, the Whigs in the House of Representatives initiated that body's first impeachment proceedings against the president. The congressional ill will towards John Tyler derived from the basis of the vetoes of the Whigs' the distribution program. So until the presidency of the Whigs' archenemy Andrew Jackson, presidents rarely vetoed bills only on the grounds of constitutionality. But John Tyler's his accidency, right? His actions were in opposition to the presumed authority of Congress to make policy. Congressman John Botts, who opposed John Tyler, introduced an impeachment resolution on July 10th, 1842. John Botts probably would have got his impeachment, right? Neither party was liking John Tyler. It leveled several charges against John Tyler, called for a 9-member committee to investigate his behavior with the expectation of a formal impeachment recommendation. But big, strong, powerful war hawk Henry Clay found impeachment prematurely aggressive. Henry Clay, who's like a big dick to William Henry Harrison, it was because Henry Clay was up William Henry Harrison's ass. That's why he died, part of the reason was everybody knocking at his door trying to get his attention for shit. That's why you need a good chief of staff, right? To only allow the most important things through. The Botch resolution was tabled until the following January when it was rejected by a vote of 127 to 83. That's because Henry Clay, he said that John Tyler was his impeachment was inevitable. So Henry Clay fucking lied. Remember Mr. Corrupt Bargain, big shocker, fucking Henry Clay, Mr. Slave Owner lied. He was like, oh, John Tyler's going to be impeached. It's inevitable. There's nothing we can do about it. That's going to fail, right? So Henry Clay, the guy who's sitting there harassing him, is like, whoa, don't be that mean. So clearly Henry Clay was getting something then. You're going to have John Quincy Adams. He's a House Select Committee. He's going to run this House Select Committee. He's an abolitionist who dislikes slaveholders like John Tyler. So John Quincy Adams, right, is the son of John Adams and Abigail Adams, who were both anti-slavery too during George Washington's time. So you want to go ahead and excuse George Washington's disgusting, sick fucking behavior. Then you're minimizing John Adams, Abigail Adams, Alexander Hamilton, and John Lawrence. John Lawrence. You don't know about John Lawrence because you got George Washington's face on your dollar bill. But John Lawrence was a badass, and he deserves to be on our dollar bill. John Lawrence is okay. So the committee's report didn't formally recommend impeachment, but it clearly established the possibility. In August 1842, the House of Adams sponsored a constitutional amendment to change both houses' two-thirds requirement for overriding vetoes to a simple majority, but neither house had approved, which would have been interesting, a constitutional amendment to override a veto. The Whigs were unable to pursue further impeachment proceedings. In the subsequent 28th Congress, in the elections of 1842, they retained a majority in the Senate, but they lost control of the House. Near the end of John Tyler's term in office, on March 3, 1845, Congress eventually overrode his veto of a minor bill relating to revenue cutters, the first override of a presidential veto. So that's John Tyler's essentially, that's his presidency. And then he steps down. He's been there for 4 years in the 40s. And then now we're in the 1860s. Oh, my God, there's a civil war. There's a civil war brewing. Abraham Lincoln was elected, and he loves those black folks. Come on, South, let's get the hell out of this country. John Tyler owned lots of slaves. John Tyler believed in states' rights. He didn't think the federal government could do anything about slavery. He maintained that position his entire life. John Tyler owned dozens, 40 to 60 different slaves, and there was one charge saying that he was birthing slaves and then selling his children to other families. So he was the U.S. president. A U.S. president is going to serve in God, when you have a president saying that it was acceptable, he might have been the main voice that, made it seem like what they were all doing was okay. So John Brown is going to have his infamous 1859 raid on Harper's Ferry, where he wanted to start the Civil War. So John Brown was, small Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln was big-time John Brown. So it's kind of weird, right? A war is okay, but John Brown trying to take over one arsenal in order to... John Brown's attack on Harper's Ferry, all the slave owners and the Confederate pieces of shit, the white supremacists are all afraid. Oh, no, they're going to take... And it's only 1%, so about 10,000 slave owners, and then the rest are just a bunch of poor white racist dumbasses who don't realize that their lot in this world is the exact same. Okay, so John Tyler's community organized a Confederate cavalry troop and a home guard immediately after John Brown's raid, and John Tyler was chosen to command the home guard troops with the rank of captain. So immediately, right, they're going to raise troops, Confederate troops, and who's the captain of these Confederate troops in Virginia? John Tyler. And then on the eve of the Civil War, the 10th U.S. President, John Tyler, re-entered public life as a major participant in the Virginia Peace Conference. That was held in Washington, D.C. in February 1861. The Virginia Peace Conference was a last-ditch effort to stop a war. The convention sought a compromise to avoid civil war, even as the Confederate Constitution was being drawn up at the Montgomery Convention at the same time. Despite his leadership role in the Peace Conference, John Tyler opposed its final resolutions. John Tyler felt that they were written by the free state delegates, did not protect the rights of slave owners in the territories, so he wanted to expand slavery into the new states that joined the Union, And he, was like, I'm with the Deep South on this. So he voted against the conference's 7 resolutions, which the conference sent to Congress for approval late in February 1861. It's a proposed constitutional amendment. It gets voted down. The Peace Conference of 1861 was a meeting of 131 leading American politicians in February 1861 at the Willard's Hotel in Washington, D.C. on the eve of the American Civil War. The success of Abraham Lincoln and the Republican Party in the to the South, the elections were held to select delegates to special conventions to consider secession from the Union. Oh no, Abraham Lincoln got elected. Let's get the hell out of here. The conference convened on February 4th, 1861 at the Willard Hotel. All 7 Deep South states had already passed ordinances of secession to protect white supremacy and the institution of slavery. What a peculiar institution. That's what they called it back then. The peculiar institution. They're preparing to form a new government in Montgomery, Alabama at the same time that John Tyler, selected to head the peace convention, was making his opening remarks in Washington. His granddaughter was ceremonially hoisting the flag for the convention in Montgomery. No delegates were sent by the Deep South states or by Arkansas, Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, California, and Oregon. 14 free states and 7 slave states were represented. So there's 21 states. Those are a bunch of Westerns. So John Tyler, he's an elected delegate to the Virginia Convention to consider whether or not the Deep South, to follow the Deep South states out of the Union. So he goes to this Virginia Peace Conference, fucks it all up, so there is no peace for the nation because John Tyler fucks it up. After John Tyler fucks up the Virginia Peace Conference, then he goes to the secession convention in Virginia. So you had all those Deep South states, but Virginia still hadn't seceded yet. President John Tyler says, fuck America, fuck this country, we're going to fight for the Confederacy, and we're going to, kill a whole bunch of people that believe in the United States of America. And so John Tyler, he had thought at the very end something about getting 6 free, 6 slave border states, and that's it, to resolve the sectional split. So he wanted even, half slave states, half free states. That's the only way that, we're going to get a fair deal. And, he was defending slavery. So John Tyler's like the worst fucking president ever. I mean...
No. Stay on this side.
Fourth, he voted for secession when the convention rejected it. So the Virginia first convention that they held was secession. They said, no, we're going to stick with the Union. But John Tyler said, no, fuck America, fuck this country, fuck this thing. We want to separate. We want a confederacy. We want to get into a different, he wants to protect his slaves. I got 60 slaves at home and they're doing all the damn work. If the slaves don't do the work, what? Am I going to have to do the work? That's insane. And what, if the slaves don't do the work for free, you think I'm going to have to pay them? What kind of crazy person are you? John Tyler just was not going to have it. He wasn't going to have it. And, it's insane. He's the shittiest. It would be like in the middle of the war, not in the middle of the war, I guess it was 20 years later, but FDR 20 years later is now a Nazi. Oh, hey, FDR, President FDR, which side are you on? Oh, you're on the side of the Nazis, huh? John Tyler, which side are you on? You're on the side of the Confederates, huh? Oh, that's just like our current president, Donald Trump, today, on the side of the...
Let me see your hands. Put your hands up. Let me see your hands. Let me see your hands. Drop the gun. Drop the gun right now. Drop the gun. Drop the gun.
Spoke against the peace conference resolutions in mid-March, and then he votes for secession when the convention didn't, and then April 17th, 1861, after the attack on Fort Sumter, you have the attack on Fort Sumter, so Virginia, attacks the federal garrison, Fort Sumter. They defend themselves. Abraham Lincoln says, time for war. They're defending our federal fucking, military fort. So John Tyler votes with the new majority for secession. So Fort Sumter, the attack, and then Lincoln's call for troops eventually pushes Virginia out of the Union, right? John Tyler, okay, so they head... John Tyler heads a committee that negotiated the terms for Virginia's entry into the Confederate States of America, helps to set the pay rate for military officers. So he's going to fight and die for the, right for white supremacy for 10,000 slave owners to be able to own slaves. On June 14th, John Tyler signed the Ordinance of Secession. 1 week later,
I couldn't do anything about it. And... he ripped off all my clothes, and he started to basically have sex with me, and I was screaming because I'd never had sex before. It was my first time, and he told us to just shut the fuck up and just basically took my virginity while I was crying and telling him to stop. And that's basically begging for him to just stop.
1861, right? So April 1861, fighting's begun. Fort Sumter, the attack on Fort Sumter. Now the Civil War has begun. What does John Tyler do? Well, he's getting ready, right? He already organized the Home Guard. He was already the corporal, the lieutenant or whatever. And then he's helping set the pay rate for military officers, really working the bureaucracy and the administrative side to make sure the Confederacy is going to be, you know, on June 14th, John Tyler signs the Ordinance of Secession. 1 week later, the convention unanimously elected him to the Provisional Confederate Congress. And he's going to serve in the Confederate Congress up into his death. Now, the Provisional Confederate Congress was just the, you know, makeshift one. He's seated in the Confederate Congress on August 1st, 1861, and he serves until November 1861 when he was actually elected to the Confederate House of Representatives. And then he's going to die, you know, Tyler is going to die in his room at the Ballard Hotel in Richmond, Virginia, before the first official session of the Confederate Congress could open in February 1862. So John Tyler is going to die an old fucking man and, you know, alone in his room in the Ballard Hotel in Richmond as a Confederate. And the United States is not going to recognize him. They're not going to recognize his life. He doesn't have a presidential library. His coffin was cloaked with a Confederate flag. He was very much a Confederate. At the very end of his life, he was the biggest traitor that you could possibly fucking think of. And it's crazy that, you know, he's been forgotten because he's a, you know, he fought against this nation. He's worse than a Benedict Arnold. You can't get worse of a Benedict Arnold than a fucking John Tyler, right? Hey, wait a second, Barack Obama, what are you doing? Oh, you're now a Nazi? Oh, that's interesting. You're now part of ISIS. Hey there, Bill Clinton and George W. Bush. You're now part of Al-Qaeda. How to impeach a war criminal president in 3 easy steps. So the way that you impeach and convict the war criminal president, first you got to find the war criminal president. Find the criminal, then you get the House to impeach, then you get the Senate to convict. And the Senate needs 2/3, and the chief judge is going to be the one that presides over the Senate trial. The House of Representatives are the ones that bring forth the impeachment. So you got to find the criminal, and a president can be impeached for treason, bribery, high crimes, and or misdemeanors. So treason, supporting Confederates, supporting Nazis, it's treasonous. Bribery, so getting paid in the hotels by foreign nationals, high crimes, and or misdemeanors. Find a criminal, impeach, convict. Be part of Al-Qaeda, right? That'd be a little bit weird if you saw Bill Clinton run around with Al-Qaeda, if you saw Barack Obama or George W. Bush, right, running around ISIS. Hey, what are you doing there, George W.? You're part of ISIS now. Okay. John Tyler, we're still going to say presidential. He still got the Sherwood Plantation, and they had 15 kids. So the Tyler name is, you know, it's all over the place. And it was born, you know, such racism, big, major racism. So the Tyler family, John Tyler's family, they've definitely been grandfathered. There's privilege. You want to talk about some fucking privilege? So John Tyler, he's elected to the first Confederate House of Representatives. He's in Richmond. He becomes ill. Then he dies January 18th, not February, January 1862. He's 72 years old. He was a delegate to the Virginia Secession Convention. He pushed for Virginia, which was the founding of this nation. Virginia seceded from the Union in 1861. John Tyler was elected to the Confederate House of Representatives, but he died in Richmond, Virginia. He served in the Confederacy. He was a secessionist. His coffin was cloaked with the Confederate flag. The U.S. never recognized his death. He's got no presidential library. The last comments, I guess, the John C. Breckinridge. This is the only other person that's like a major political figure that fights for the Confederacy. So he's vice president under James Buchanan. John C. Breckinridge is. He's the vice president. He runs for president in 1861 as a Southern Democrat, while Stephen A. Douglas ran as a Northern Democrat. He loses the presidency to Abraham Lincoln. Then the Kentucky legislature, John C. Breckinridge, he is elected to the U.S. Senate. and the U.S. senators were elected by state legislatures until the 17th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution was ratified in 1913. So a divided Kentucky remained in the Union. The nearest star to us, other than the sun, the nearest star is Alpha Centauri C. So that's Proxima Centauri is a cluster of 3 stars. Alpha Centauri C is the star that's closest to us. And the star that's closest to us is about 4 light years away. And a light year is the distance light travels in a year. So in 1 second, a beam of light travels 186,000 miles. So Alpha Centauri C is very, 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 very far away. But we can send a spaceship there, and it would take us about 10,000 years. This is according to a book that should be a textbook, A Briefer History of Time. The history of time? What the hell does that mean? History is the time, that's before time, and then time, how can you have a history? John C. Breckinridge is going to become a pro-Southern senator. He's expelled from the Senate, the U.S. Senate, December 1861. He joins the Confederate Army, rises to the rank of Major General. Breckinridge fought in several important battles in both the East and the West. He is appointed Secretary of War in 1865. Once the Confederates lost the war, John C. Breckinridge leaves the country, but then returns home to Kentucky in 1869, where he becomes a lawyer, and then he's going to die in Lexington, Kentucky in 1875. So just 4 years after he took up arms against the United States, he's allowed to come back to Kentucky and become a lawyer, and then he's going to die, 6 years after that. So that's the only person I could compare John Tyler to. John Tyler was the president. He was the president. So John C. Breckinridge was vice president. So his stake is a lot less in it. Vice president, just they break ties in the Senate and they chair the Senate, but that's it. So, compare, John Tyler was worse. You can't